Hello and welcome to the channel today. I'm Will and I'm going to be talking about 25 books to read in 2025. Of course, the numbers go together, but I thought to make it a little bit more complicated than just 25 random books, I'm going to pick 5 books on my TBR from each genre. And that way I could kind of clarify my priorities for each. I've said many times, if you followed the channel before, you'll recognise that I think to avoid reading slumps and consistently read, a key way to do that is to vary your reading, and a great way to do that is through diving and delving into different genres. And so I read almost every genre out there, and the ones that I haven't, I want to read soon. Basically, I love to really see a wide range of literature, and hopefully you can see that displayed today. So I'm going to do 5 books for 5 different genres. We'll have fantasy, historical fiction, non-fiction, horror, and the classics as well. And so let's get straight on into it. The genre I read the most, and that is fantasy. So the first one on the list for me is The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is a book I have heard so much about, and book 2 is slated to be released in 2025. It is one that Ed has got me to read, and he'll be pretty happy I'm finally picking it up. And so Ed is very good with his recommendations, and I'm quite good with his as well. It shows as brothers we do know each other's reading tastes, and so I feel pretty sure I'm going to love The Will of the Many. I have not seen a book one of a series rated this highly on Goodreads for a long time. It is a school, it is Roman inspired, there is espionage, and there's a hidden past as well. What more can you ask for in a series? It sounds like it was written for me. I love every component there, and I cannot wait to pick up The Will of the Many. And then I've got Gardens of the Moon, book 1 of Malazan. What a big gun we've got here. So I will be starting this series in 2025, and I will also read Deadhouse Gates as well. And then depending on how I receive those two, we'll see if I carry on with the series or end the journey there. But I think it's about time. I can't believe I'm a booktuber for nearly 4 years and I haven't read Malazan or The Wheel of Time. I read the first 3 installments of The Wheel of Time many years ago and stopped there. And I was a bit too young. I didn't really grasp the complexity. And so basically I haven't read either of those, 2 of the biggest series in fantasy history. And so I need to earn my points here as a booktuber, mainly for fantasy, and start Gardens of the Moon. And yeah, hopefully really enjoy it. I'm not quite sure when I'll pick it up. I think I will towards the end of January, early February, and then I'll read it gradually. I've got a lot of uni reading on, and we'll get to a bit of that later with a few of these texts on here are compulsory reads and some also surrounding knowledge as well. And so a lot of my reading time will be dictated by the uni needs, basically. And so this is everything I try to fit around that. So Gardens of the Moon might have to take a back step for now, but I'll try and read it gradually, and that way I think I might be able to grasp a lot more of what's going on and just feel immersed for longer, which who doesn't want a great book last for longer? So there we go, that is Gardens of the Moon. And then next up I have got Empire of the Damned, book 2 of the Empire of the Vampire trilogy. Book 3 is also coming out in 2025, and so I'll hopefully be reading book 2 and book 3. I love book 1. It's a Marmite book. You'll either love it or you'll hate it, in my opinion. There isn't really an in-between. It evokes very strong reactions. And I can tell this is a series that won't be for a lot of people. But then again, as I said, if you do pick up and like it, I think this will be a new favourite of yours. And there are some bold choices made with Empire of the Damned. I've heard it goes from 1 POV to 2, which is a very big decision in a series that people love following 1 POV to then expand and change the narrative and structure. But apparently it's paid off. Most people I know who have read this love that decision and said it does really earn its mark. And it really highlights the series instead of detracting from what was loved from book 1. And so yeah, that's Empire of the Damned. And hopefully book 3, which I don't think there's a title for at the moment. Or if there is, I need to go and find out. And then next up, book 4 for fantasy for me will be Blood Over Bright Haven. This, again, has just received incredible praise, and this was released in 2024. I love the Sword of Kaigan, and whilst this is a very different series, I just imagine that expert writing style is going to be applied in here as well. It's dark academia. I don't really know much else beside that. I know Chris and Mads love it, so what else do I need to know? And yeah, I love this edition as well. And yeah, it's just, I think, going to be one of my favourite reads of 2025. Another one of those, you know, when you hear what a book is about and you think, you know, I really believe that is going to click. And so, of course, it might not live up to the expectations, but I've got high hopes, fingers crossed, it hits those lofty expectations. And so, yeah, that is Blood over Brighthaven, book 4 of the fantasy reads for 2025. And then last up, I've got The Devils by Gerber Crombie, a 2025 publication. Very lucky to be sent an early arc. My brother has got it at the moment, so I will be making sure to get hold of that. We need to share. And so, yeah, really looking forward to diving into this latest release of Gerber Crombie's. He is one of my top 3 favourite authors of all time. And so I'm really fascinated to see what it's going to be like in a completely new world. I really enjoyed his Shattered Sea trilogy. It's completely different to the First Law. It's not YA, but it's definitely younger than the First Law. And I really enjoyed it. I know a lot of people didn't, but I'm one who's enjoyed basically every book Gerber Crombie's written. And so I've got high hopes for a work in a different world than the First Law. He's done it before. I believe he can do it again. And I like that he's really embracing kind of the chaotic side. It sounds like he is anyway. I've seen the cast of characters and I love how their story is basically going to be tied together. And they sound very crazy, very unique. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see where that goes. So that is the fantasy section of the video. Over 5 books for fantasy. Now onto 5 books for historical fiction. First up, I've got Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This is a titan of the Western genre, and it is my brother Ed's one of his favourite books of all time. And so it's time that I dive in. Lonesome Dove is an epic but with an intimate story. I've heard that the character work is at the front. First and foremost, it is the focus. And I'm a character-driven reader, so that speaks very well in my favour. I love a book that really rests on the characters. I do love an epic story, and I love epic fantasy with huge stakes, but I only feel invested in the stakes if I care about the characters and how their story is going to pan out. And so Lonesome Dove, whilst it is quite epic in some ways, and I think it's quite philosophical as well, a lot of this is about dialogue, but Larry McMurtry does it so well that you really feel hooked and immersed. And my brother Ed said it's some of the best scenes that he has ever read. And it is a chunker of a book, but it's one that apparently you don't really feel that size as you're going through. You do in the sense that it is an epic and an incredible journey, but then you could read it much quicker and it never feels like a slog. And so this is possibly the most seminal Western work out there, and so I'll be able to tick that off the list. I've only read True Grit and The Sisters Brothers, and both of those Westerns I've really thoroughly enjoyed, and so maybe it's going to be a 100% record for the Westerns going forward. And so that's the first historical fiction read I'm talking about today. And then I have got Shogun, which is by James Clavell. This had an adaptation in 2024. I've held off watching it because I want to read the root material first, so I'm not committing book sacrilege. Of course, it doesn't matter if you do watch the programme first, but I feel like I prefer reading the root material and then watching it, whereas when I watch it, it kind of detracts more from the book, I think, than the other way round. Because, of course, a programme, it has to cut a lot out and it has to do many things differently. And so I really enjoy reading the book first. Also, Papa Gwyn and Ed have told me to read Shogun for the past decade, and so I need to do them service and read this. Again, it's meant to be one of the best historical fiction works out there. So really 2025, it is a year for the big guns. For fantasy, I've got Gardens of the Moon. And then for historical fiction, I've got Lonesome Dove and Shogun. And I think there is going to be a season 2 of Shogun, which I think a lot of people have reacted quite negatively to because it will go off script from the book. But the programme has done so magnificently well that I'm really looking forward to watching the adaptation as well. But as I said, I'll be ticking this off. And I know people's main complaint is the end of this kind of dies off quite quickly. But I think as I going in not expecting a big battle at the end, then I'll be okay. I think I'll enjoy it more than many people who that came as a shock to. So yeah, that is Shogun. Again, another chunker of a book. I think this and Lonesome Dove will be kind of summer reads for me. Rewards for finishing my second year at university. And so, yeah, to finish all the reading at uni, dive into some reading of my own. And so that is Shogun. And then I have got Nero by Con Iggulden. So, of course, it's Nero. It's about the Emperor Nero, who apparently has got a very bad rep in history for not all the right reasons. So, He's called Mad Emperor Nero, famed for burning down part of Rome. But there's a lot more to him, apparently, and Conor Goodin is endeavouring to show that side. And I'm just fascinated by Roman history, but it's one of those that whilst I'm really fascinated, I really don't know much about. I only really know kind of surrounding material. I wouldn't say I'm an expert or know a lot about any period of Roman history. So hopefully this can fill in some of the gaps. Of course, it's fiction, so parts will be made up, but I love that Conor Goodin, I think, strikes a really great balance between immersion and storytelling. At least I found so with his Genghis Khan series, and also The Gates of Athens and Protector, which is just a magnificent duology. If you like Greek fiction, ancient Greek fiction, check out The Gates of Athens and Protector. I just think they're two of the best books ever written. And so let's see if Conor Goodin can kind of keep that what am I trying to look for? That streak of great works up with Nero, moving on to ancient Rome. And so yeah, really looking forward to picking up Nero. And then I have got Warlord by Bernard Cornwell, the 13th and final installment in the Saxon stories, following Uhtred, son of Uhtred. I imagine it's going to be an emotional journey finishing up this series. 12 books, that about 300 pages each one. That's around 3,600 pages. It may be closer to 4,000. That is a lot of time to spend with one POV. But I have loved the journey. There have been some peaks and troughs. I did the other way around there. There's been peaks and there's been troughs to this series. But because they're a bit templatey, you can leave them a while and come back. And then later in the series, I've found that it's surged to whole new highs. I've loved Uhtred as an older man. And this is meant to be a magnificent finale that most people find really powerful and poignant and satisfying. So yeah, that is Warlord, Bernard Cornwell. I had to have a Bernard Cornwell on there. I don't think I've gone a year without reading a Bernard Cornwell book. And so I have to keep that up. And then last up for historical fiction, I've got Boudicca's Daughter by Elodie Harper, the author of the Wolf Den trilogy, which is just one of my favourite trilogies of all time. The House of the Golden Door, the middle installment, is one of my favourite books of all time. And I just think that she's a wonderful character writer. As I said earlier, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, I'm a character-driven reader. And so Elodie Harper seems to be a character-driven writer. And so a natural pairing, and I think she's just so skilled across the board. And now she's applying herself to a topic I'm even more interested in than Pompeii in ancient Rome. This is moving to Boudica, Boudicca's Daughter, Boudicca's Rebellion, and I'm just convinced that she's going to find a way to tell this story beautifully, finding a bit of a different lens. I don't know if Boudicca's Daughter will be the POV. If so, that's a very interesting change, because I will need to separate myself from Amanda Scott's Boudica series, because it is hard when an author in historical fiction genre has written a series you love so much and someone else writes about the same period of time. And so I think I will really like it if the POV is Boudicca's Daughter. It will change things up a bit. And it is a standalone as well. So I'm wondering what will be included in this installment. But yeah, Elodie Harper, I cannot wait. And she's going to be an author that I follow regardless of what she writes, basically. I think after Boudicca's Daughter, she's writing about, I can't believe I've forgotten her name, Antony's wife, after Julius Caesar's fall. But anyway, so that's her next few works and I'll be picking them up. But in 2025, the final one for historical fiction today, it is Boudicca's Daughter. And now moving on to fiction/classics, I have got Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, the latest of her releases. I've loved all of her previous books and I cannot wait to dive into this. I've said before on the channel, people are calling this her most mature work, which I'm a bit hesitant to believe that, because a lot of people, I think, are a bit snobby towards Sally Rooney because her books are largely focused on romance. And romance, weirdly, is conflated with immaturity. I don't know why, when it is such a huge part of our world and it doesn't have to be immature. And it's just a fact of life. So I'm a bit holding back a bit from believing that. But I do know that Intermezzo isn't as much focused on romance. It's more about the relationship between two brothers who are grieving. And so I understand that it's a very different topic matter, and that's maybe where they mean the maturity has come in. I'm not sure. I'll be able to find out why when I read this book. But yeah, it's one of those that Sally Rooney is another one of my favourite authors, so I need to wait for the right time to pick it up where I'm not rushing, and it's one that I can really sink my teeth into and mull over, because that's like what I like to do with Sally Rooney's books. They're very thought-provoking and they take up time outside of the actual reading experience, which is really what we want as readers, or at least that's what I endeavour to find. And so intermezzo, really looking forward to picking this up. And then I have got The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, which I believe was his first book. And I'm not really sure what it's about, actually. But I've read The Old Man and the Sea. I've read For Whom the Bell Tolls. Loved them both. And it was either between picking A Farewell to Arms or The Sun Also Rises. And I just think I want to pick this up first. And also, it's a lovely edition. And it's quite short as well. And so a few bonuses there. Ernest Hemingway writes so concisely in a way that is so moving. He doesn't waste time. And I really respect that. I think he's famous for, I'm probably going to mess the wording up, but he said, it's easy to write something that only you understand. The hard part is writing something that everyone can relate to. And so that's what he endeavoured to do. And many people obviously found that The Sun Also Rises struck a chord with them. It's known as a canonical work, and it's one that I think relates a lot about the context of the time, so maybe some of the power has been lost. I remember reading an academic paper where someone said it's very interesting seeing how different works were received by different generations, because this was written about contemporary issues, but it's one that still resonates today, apparently, and we'll see how it hits with me in 2025. I love Ernest Hemingway's writing, and this will be the next book on the list for me. And then I've got a book that I need to read for uni, and that is Middlemarch, which is known as one of, if not the greatest Victorian texts. And so, high expectations, not a hard bar to hit, right? So yeah, George Eliot's magnum opus. This is Middlemarch. I don't really know much about it, but yeah, I know that I need to read it for uni. It's on the compulsory list. I will be having seminars and lectures on it, so hopefully I love it. I'm always a bit... hold myself back a bit again, like I said with Intermezzo about the maturity. I always make sure to not go in with too high expectations with these canonical books, because yes, they're canonical for a reason, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be your favourite book in the world. Most of the books I've read on the course I respect and really enjoy learning about, but it doesn't mean they're one of my favourites. So that's kind of the approach I take now, to make sure I'm not too disappointed by the reading experience. But yeah, that is Middlemarch, and I hope I will love it. Talking about uni reads, next up I've got Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So very different topic and style and tone and atmosphere than Middlemarch and some of the other uni reads I'm talking about today. But it's another one on the Victorian Literature module reading list. And so I'm really looking forward to diving into it. I never really watched any adaptations or read them when I was younger. And so, of course, I know about the Mad Hatter, and is it the Red Queen as well? I'm not sure, but I don't really know what happens in the story. I know Alice stumbles into a whole new world along the lines of Narnia, but of course, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland came first. And so, really looking forward to picking this up. A bit of a lighter read, where at uni they often pick quite dense, long reads. David Copperfield as one of them, which nears 1,000 pages. And so I'm very glad to have a bit of a shorter book in there. And so I'm not drowning as much under the reading pile. And so that's always quite nice, a little break. And so yeah, I will be reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And then the last up for the fiction/classic section I've got in this video, it is The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I watched a film a few years ago called Living, which was inspired by a Akira Kurosawa film, which was inspired by the death of Ivan Ilyich. So I'm tracing it back to its origins. This is a novella, and it is about what it means to live. It is a man who, I think he finds out he has a terminal illness, and he finds a new lease of life. He realised he's been living to work instead of working to live. And that is something that I think resonates a lot with people today, in a world where there's so many things that we're told that we have to do and are necessary to do. We have to work, but we need to remember why we're doing it instead of falling into a routine. It's about finding the most in life. I've got a sign there called Carpe Diem. Dead Poets Society is my favourite film. And so the theme of seizing the day and making the most of life is something that I'm fascinated by, and it's something that resonates with me and I'd love to read more about. And so yeah, the death of Ivan Ilyich. And I've also not read anything by Leo Tolstoy. And so kind of pushing the boundaries of literature a bit further out, another author that I need to have come across, Leo Tolstoy. And so The Death of Ivan Ilyich will be the first that I read by him. And I'm really looking forward to picking it up. I've heard great things. It's one that, despite being written over 100 years ago, that it easily transports to the modern day. I think his writing style is meant to be quite timeless as well. And so, see what I think of that. That is the last for the section of classics and fiction. And now going on to horror. I've not read much horror in the past, but I want to a bit more in 2025. And some things have aligned to mean that I will read more. And so to further develop on that, I'll be reading Dracula. And this will be some wider reading for me. As I've said, I've got a Victorian literature module, and Dracula is during the end of the Victorian age, during the end of the 19th century. And it is Gothic, and the Gothic emergence is something I'm very fascinated by. I love books like The Picture of Dorian Gray and Frankenstein. And so it is really sacrilege that I've not read Dracula. Also, I recently watched Nosferatu, the new film by Robert Eggers, which is very disturbing, and the story is very similar to that of Dracula. And so I really want to pick up the root material. And sorry, I'm about to sneeze. Sorry about that, I'm back. Dracula is one of Papa Gwyn's favourite books, and it's written in a very unique style. I believe it is all in the epistolary form. It might not all be, but a lot is. And so I'm really looking forward to finding out how that style is translated into the Gothic genre. I've never read a book that is entirely written through letters, and so I'll find that really interesting. And it's another one of Papa Gwyn's favourites. I don't think Papa Gwyn has ever had a favourite book of his that I've not enjoyed. There may be some I've not loved as much as he did, but I've never been disappointed by the reading experience. And so, of course, I've been raised by Papa Gwyn, given a lot of books by Papa Gwyn, and so our reading tastes obviously align quite a lot. And so that is Dracula, some horror, some Gothicness to chuck into the mix of 2025. And being able to tie it in with some wider reading for university makes me feel even more productive whilst picking up a book I've wanted to for years. And so 2 birds with 1 stone there. And then I have got Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill. I really loved Horns in 2024. It was one of my favourite reads of the year. And so Heart-Shaped Box, according to Papa Gwyn, is Joe Hill's second best book. He also loved Horns and he thinks that's his best work. And then Heart-Shaped Box number 2. He talked to me about the premise. I was hooked. Papa Gwyn, he's a storyteller. And so often when I'm interested in picking up another book by an author that he's read, I'll go to him, ask him to talk about the premises, what he loves, what they're about, and would I enjoy them? Of course, without spoilers. And Papa Gwyn is very good at kind of pinpointing what it is about a book that might intrigue me. And yeah, he's got me hooked. And so I will be picking up Heart-Shaped Box in 2025. And then going from the son Joe Hill to the father Stephen King, I will be picking up possibly his most famous work, It. And I'm terrified of clowns, so this is probably going to be a book that scares me most in 2025. Yeah, it's Pennywise. It's going to be terrifying, and I cannot believe I've not read it as of yet. I've read 10 or 11 Stephen King books, and talking about that, I will also be reading Never Flinch, which I'm not sure is going to be supernatural or just thriller crime at the moment. So I've lumped it into the horror category because even if it is psychological, it will still be scary, I'm guessing. So Never Flinch will be Stephen King's 2025 release, and there is a crime investigation. I just don't know if it turns supernatural as of yet. I do know that he loves to kind of take on the crime element and add an element of the unknown on top of that. And so yeah, 2 Stephen King reads for 2025. And then last up, it's thriller, so it's not quite horror, but I've kind of lumped horror, thriller, psychological all in the same category. And I've got some crime with A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle. Of course, it's Sherlock Holmes. And I read half of this in a tent when I was camping a few years ago. And then the book got so wet that it was destroyed, which is book sacrilege from me. And I've never gone back to read the rest. But I remember really enjoying it. And so I will finally get to finishing it, hopefully in 2025. Another canonical seminal work that I'm really looking forward to diving into. And yeah, there's not much more to say beside that. I'm someone who loves watching crime adaptations, but I've not really read much crime. There's books such as The Promise of Blood, where I love the detective plot in it, but it's not a crime book. And that is the Powder Mage trilogy. It's epic fantasy, and there's one POV who leads a detective storyline. And I love that, but I've never read a book dominated by a crime investigation. And so, yeah, A Study in Scarlet, not where it began, but known as one of the kings of the genre. So I'll be diving into this to see if it's a genre more for me. And so that is the end of the horror, thriller, crime kind of combination section. And now onto the final one for today. It is non-fiction. First up, it wouldn't be a year of reading without a Dan Jones book. I've got Henry V. It came out in 2024, but I'll be reading it in 2025. It is the first book Dan Jones has written about a specific figure in history, and Henry V, what a place to start. He is known as England's greatest warrior king, and of course greatest is according to the criteria of a great king then. It's not about moral complexity and moral upstanding, because basically no monarch in history has been. So Henry V, basically to be a good king was to maintain your taxes and invade the French. That was what it was for an English king. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's two of the reasons Henry V has gone down in legend as an English monarch. And so I'm looking forward to diving into this, seeing Dan Jones's insight in a way that is accessible and really kind of exposes many interesting parts about Henry V's life without being too dense. And instead kind of opens the lid up to what you might want to dive into more. That's what I love about the kind of authors like Dan Jones. He doesn't endeavour to reveal everything, but he shows you kind of what you're passionate in by diving into a bit there, a bit here, and a bit there as well. So that's Henry V, the first non-fiction book I'm talking about today. And then I have got Pax by Tom Holland. I have not read a Tom Holland book before, so I'm looking forward to reading one here. Pax, of course, about the peace, or the Roman peace, which, was it a fiction, was it real? I imagine Tom Holland will show arguments for both periods of peace and periods of war and how they were brought about by brutality. And as I've said earlier in this video, I'm fascinated by ancient Roman history, but I know weirdly little about it. And so I'm looking forward to diving into Pax by Tom Holland. And then I need to read Rubicon, which is known as his best work as of yet. Michael Kiss, I'll be coming to you for some more non-fiction recommendations in 2025. But that's two. Let's get on to the next, which is how conflict shaped us. War, sadly, is a recurring theme throughout the history of humanity. It is a tragedy, but it is one there from the beginning of history as we know it, where there's small scales, fights between individuals, and huge scale wars. It is terrible, but it is something that has been with us. And this is a book that endeavours to examine why, but also how it has shaped history. What would be different without it? And how it has brought on advancements. Of course, war is a terrible, terrible thing. But looking at kind of the juxtaposition of how war has brought advancements as well and changed the world in ways that could not have been guessed. And so I find that quite fascinating. And the irony that war has brought people together as well. I'm reading a book at the moment, A History of Britain in 10 Enemies. And one of the recurring points in there is that outward threats unite Britain in a way that nothing else does. And it's quite ironic that it takes kind of an almost eschatological threat to bring people together. And so I imagine that will also be combated as a theme in war, how conflict shaped us. So a very fascinating read. And then next up, I have got The Greatest Nobodies of History, which seems like a fun non-fiction book, which offers an insight into different periods of history through kind of the ordinary person. And often I think it's a figure who we know quite a bit about, but only because they were quite close to a major figure in history. And so they themselves are seen as quite insignificant, but it reveals a lot more about the everyday life because we know them through kind of the more important figures of history. And then next up, I have got Empires and Barbarians, The Fall of Rome. And so one of my modules in the next term is about barbarian law. And I think it'll be combating kind of the idea that, oh, there was no law in barbarian kingdoms, and kind of looking at that stigma. A bit like last year, I had a module, Decline and Crisis during the Middle Ages, and instead looked at how there was much progress during the Middle Ages in Europe. And so I think that this is a module that will endeavour to do the same, shine a light on the advancements that were made. And of course, whilst there's lots of war and conflict, there's lots of advancements, and advancements also in the rule of law, and how that had kind of a tighter grip on the land than it had in previous times. And so that would be fascinating to look at. And yeah, that is all the books for the non-fiction genre. And so there we go. That is 25 books for 2025, broken into 5 different genres. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you'll be reading any of these. Let me know your priorities for each genre. And happy reading for the beginning of 2025. Carpe diem.